Aloha! Today we are going to talk about what it actually means to Malama O Aina. We hear that a lot today, Malama O Aina. What does it mean to take care of the land here in Hawaii? I'm Jaya Dupuy, President of Hawaii Environmental Restoration on the Big Island of Hawaii. Hawaii is very far removed from any continental mass, and because of this, very few species actually arrived here on their own. Species that did arrive over millions of years evolved and speciated, and because of that, there is a lot of endemism here in Hawaii. Endemism means that they evolved here and they do not actually exist anywhere else in the world. Of over 1,400 native flowering plants, 90% of them are actually endemic. Over millions of years, native species actually lost their defense mechanisms because there was so little competition or predation here. And today, as we drive around in the lowland area, sadly, there are very few native species that remain. Most what you see as you're going around in your car is not native. Besides loss of habitat due to human development, invasive species are a principal cause for the loss of native plant life. Taking a more conscious role in balancing our ongoing influence on vegetation patterns in Hawaii can make a very big difference. What can we do to improve upon our environmental circumstance? Because it's never too late to make things better. First of all, we can get to know our plant species, because what we choose to plant in our yards has a tremendous impact on the future of Hawaii. Let's review our plant distinctions. First of all, there is native, there is non-native, there's Polynesian introduced, and invasive species. Let's go over these together. Native species arrived here on their own through wind, water, or wing. They were not introduced here by humans. The following slides are examples of native species, some of which you might know. Here we have the akea, the alahe'e, the hala, and the ie. The kolea, the ko'oko'olau, kopiko, and ko. The beautiful maili, the lovely lama, the prized mamaki, and of course the milo. Ule, koali'awa, naupaka, pohinahina. And some of the native ferns, the uluhe, which is quite dominant on early succession flows along with the young ohia. And the ekaha, also known as bird nest fern. The hapu'u, which many of us know, and which is more prevalent in higher regions, and the lovely palapalai. Non-native plants. Those are the plants that were introduced by humans. They're also known as exotic or alien species. And there's well over 8,000 of those today, probably closer to 9 actually. And but what is good to know is that less than 100 of these are actually considered invasive. And that, in other words, they coexist fairly well with the native flora. Polynesian introductions. Those are the ones that arrived here with the early Hawaiians. They're also known as the canoe plants, and there were less than 50 of them. Mostly they were non-invasive, and all of them are important to human survival and to our sense of culture and place here in Hawaii. Here we have the ava, which most people know, and the tea. Both of these plants are very important to culture here in Hawaii. And we have the beautiful the ohia'i, the mountain apple. Delicious. And the famous kalo, the ulu, the uwala. These are substance foods here in Hawaii. And of course the olena, also known as turmeric. Here we have the noni, the mai'a, the banana, the avapuhi, and the ko, the sugar cane. And here we have the hau and the kukui, both of which have a more invasive quality to them. And then, of course, the kamani and the ohe, the bamboo. And then there are the famous invasive species, those plants that are harmful to the environment here in Hawaii because they grow too fast and aggressively, and they tend to replace rather than coexist with native species, causing many extinctions over time. The plants were brought here because they're either pretty or useful somehow, and usually we don't know they'll be invasive until it's too late. And there is a real problem here in the state of Hawaii with lack of enforcement and monitoring around introductions, causing more invasive species to arrive all of the time. So let's go over examples of invasive species that we want to know about, that we want to study and remember. It's so important to understand what's going on around us in the plant world, the dynamics that are going on, and how we could support our environment. Knowing our invasive species is a very big part of that. So here we have one of the worst weeds in the state of Hawaii at large, 5V, also known as the strawberry guava. There's a few different species of it. And of course, I think most of us are well aware of albizia at this point. And of course, Melokia and Cecropia are very prominent in the lowlands. Here we have the bingabing, also known as the makaranga. There are two different species here. On the left is the mapa, on the right the tanarius, and ironwood and autograph tree, also known as clusia. The octopus tree, the African tulip, yes, the African tulip, beautiful as it is, and banyan, also, such a beautiful tree, but you have to be careful where you plant it. And the gunpowder, very prominent as well. All of these following plant species are part of the same family, the Melastomataceae family, and you will notice that most of them have parallel veination and pink pretty flowers. Here we have the Melastoma septemnervium on the left and the Arthrostema on the right top. And we have the Tibucina and the Clydemia, also known as Coster's curse. And again, still part of the same family. We have the Medunilla, the Myconia, the Tetrazygia, and the Discidus, which is actually a low-growing ground cover. Thimbleberry, yes, invasive species, as is the Christmas berry, the Kukaimile, a very difficult weed, and the ginger. Most of the ginger family is invasive as well. So we have briefly gone over some of the plant species that surround us on a day-to-day level in Hawaii. Another thing we can do to support our environment is actually plant native and Polynesian introduced species. There are plenty more food plants that we could propagate in our yards that are important to our survival and to our sustainability that are not invasive. Number 3, do not plant invasive species. In fact, you can take it a step further and actually control them in your yard. There are effective ways of doing so. If properly managed, weeds hold a key to sustainability. Make efficient compost piles with your weeds. Chipping or coppicing provides mulch and compost for healthy gardens and trees. Larger stems and stumps can be used in hugelkultur to produce years of fertility. Avoid transporting yard waste that may contain invasive species. Bringing your waste over to a vacant lot next door or across the road only exacerbates the invasive species issues. Here is an example of hugelkultur. In 2014, Hurricane Iselle hit Hawaii, and some very large albizia trees came tumbling down onto my property from the neighbor's place. And so I took this as an opportunity to utilize the biomass in producing garden beds, future garden beds, by placing the larger stems at the bottom and increasingly smaller stems on top, and preparing the bed for future planting. And here it is a few years later, producing an abundance of kalo and pineapple, and continues to this day, 2022. Number 5. Well, if you have the knowledge, then you have the responsibility, the kuleana, to help your friends and neighbors learn. If you have a neighbor who's about to plant a beautiful African tulip, you might go over there and talk story with them a little while and help inform them. No matter where we are on this planet today, our forests are of utmost importance. What remains of them. Forests are the air that we breathe. They are the water that we drink. Without our forests, we do not draw the moisture, we do not draw the rain, and therefore we could not grow our crops. And there is a direct relationship there between the forest and our bellies. There is a great difference between a forest that is depleted of richness and abundance, health and vitality, and a forest that can sustain a biodiversity of life forms. Biodiversity, a key component for healthy ecosystems. In 1903, the state set aside forest reserves all over the Hawaiian Islands, and in the Puna district there were 5 of them that were designated as conservation land: Nanavale, Halepua'a, Kaniahiku, Malamaki, and Kea'ohana. unfortunately, they were left unmanaged, and because of this, largely have been replaced by invasive species alone. A small portion of Kea'ohana, the smallest of all 5 reserves, is all that remains of our native forest. Yes, it is the largest and most intact lowland native rainforest remaining below 1,000 feet in the entire state of Hawaii. In 2014, we began intensive restoration efforts in the forest of Kea'ohana, and this was the hard-working crew at the time. And this is today's crew, with myself taking the picture. This here is our restoration site map and trail system. In 2021, we completed 4 systematic passes of the entire 30 acres, and since then have consolidated our site to closer to 20 acres of the more intact core. And the main reason for that is so that we could be more efficient with our restoration efforts due to such minimal funding. We have experienced quite a few challenges along the way. As I mentioned earlier, 2014 was the year of Hurricane Azelle, and the forest was quite affected and disturbed by this event. And 1 year later, we began to notice the effects of rot in the ohia canopy. Hurricane winds likely inoculated the fungus spores into damaged trees from the epicenter of rapid ohia death in nearby Leilani estates. The feral pig was undoubtedly a contributing factor, and it is a source of much damage to the forest floor in Kea'ohana and very much counteracts our efforts. Our efforts in Kea'ohana largely consist of hand pulling and composting of all invasive species that we can pull. This compost pile consists largely of Vivy stems. This is an example of a before and after. On the left side here we have John, who is still on the crew today, and that was pretty much in the beginning when we were first addressing the Clydemia invasion in the forest. And so this is prior to the efforts, and then you could see on the right side a couple hours later that the native species have been liberated and can breathe easy again. And here's another example. On the right side you can see a very happy cluster of the endangered Ha'ivale, whereas it had been quite consumed by a mess of weeds. And for stems that cannot be pulled, we do a circumference cut at the base of the tree and then apply herbicide onto that cambium layer. And we do this with a chemical called triclopyr, which fortunately does not have any effect on other plants. It's a very localized treatment. Sometimes our efforts require a full year spray treatment. You can see a kukai infestation on the left side here, and then a few years later, after having had some support, the forest is looking much better. Besides invasive species control, our efforts also include the propagation of native species. Here in the forefront we have Ann Kobsa. She's been the one to provide us with many of our beautiful seedlings. This here is the ohe, which is a rare canopy tree, and it grows relatively quickly, and we are hoping that it will help build the shade back up for the forest. And here is a picture of our nursery in Kapoho that, again, Ann Kobsa manages so well. Another component of our work at Hawaii Environmental Restoration is education. We offer special group events in the forest for students to learn about the environment through hands-on experience. Volunteerism is a very important part of our work, and helps us a great deal in the forest. More and more people are becoming aware of how important it is to support our precious forest resources, and not only for everything that they provide, not only water and air, but food and medicine, as well as cultural context and beauty and peace of mind and recreational activity, connection to self, and a deeper relationship to the earth. Well, in this presentation we have looked at a number of ways in which we could be supportive of the environment that supports us. So let's go over these briefly one last time. What can we do? We can know our plant species. We can plant food and native plants, not invasive species, but rather weed and control them. And we can help neighbors and friends learn about this too. Finally, we can take care of our local native rainforests. And please remember that what we choose to plant in our yards has a tremendous impact on the future of Hawaii's environment. If you need support in making wise plant choices, don't hesitate to obtain Hawaii Plant World Essentials. It's a practical guide to help residents make informed decisions about plant control and propagation choices here in Hawaii. Hawaii Plant World Essentials is a plant identification guide that offers lists and images in alphabetical order for the most common lowland species according to plant distinctions discussed today. Please help promote awareness of Hawaii's vegetation species, issues, and solutions. Here are some ways you could help support your local rainforest. Mahalo for your kind attention today.